Welcome to Chapter 4. In this chapter, we will discuss the science and theory of language. First, let's define some words. A theory is descriptive statements or principles devised to explain a group of facts or phenomena. Essentially, a theory is a claim or hypothesis that can be tested repeatedly with an array of scientific methods. When the accumulated evidence consistently supports a given theory throughout time, it becomes accepted as part of the knowledge base in a discipline. We can use the theory to make predictions about natural phenomena. For language development, theories provide explanations for how and why children develop their capacity for language. Science is the process of generating and testing theories. The goal is to generate cumulative knowledge by building on, refining, and occasionally replacing theoretical understanding. Researchers who study language development use the scientific method to examine the adequacy of the theories about how and why language develop, and to generate new theories. So essentially, theories provide the foundation for scientific studies, and then the outcomes of those scientific studies help to refine and sometimes even replace the theories over time. So who studies language development and why? Scientists from many disciplines study language, such as psychology, linguists, speech-language pathologists, education, people from the education field, sociology. Each discipline has a different major focus and different research questions with respect to language development. People who study language do so for two reasons: to further the basic understanding of language as a human phenomenon, so this is basic research, or to address specific problems in society and to inform those practices, and that is applied research. So methods to studying language development. We have normative research, so experts compile data from multiple individuals on a certain aspect of language development, and then from that data, they chart the ages by which children typically meet certain milestones. So by age 1, they have maybe 10 words. By age 2, they have 300 words. And so normative research is where we get those child development milestones from. Observational studies are those where they observe the child's language in a natural environment. They record the children to capture their language for a specific time, and they don't do anything to interfere or manipulate the context. They're strictly just observing. Experimental studies are those with which researchers actively manipulate variables of interest. So they are actively trying maybe an intervention or a specific toy or a specific setup, a specific environment to see what happens with the language. So we can divide the major language development theories into three categories. We have nurture-inspired or empiricist, nature-inspired, which is nativist, and interactionist. Nurture-inspired rest on the notion that humans gain all knowledge through experience. Nurture generally hold that knowledge is innate and genetically transmitted rather than learned by experience. So probably in your psychology classes, you have talked about nature versus nurture. And then interactionists acknowledge that language develops through interaction between nature and nurture-related factors. So in the next several slides, we're going to very briefly review the major theories for language development. There are a few great charts in the textbook on pages 107 through 109 that I would recommend looking at. So first we have the behaviorist theory by B.F. Skinner. The major tenets of the behaviorist theory is that children are essentially a blank slate without innate knowledge, and that children learn through operant conditioning. Operant conditioning describes how behaviors are shaped by responses to the behaviors. The result is that behaviors that are reinforced become strong, and that those that are punished become suppressed. So for language, children learn as an adult reinforces their verbalizations. If a child says doggy while pointing to a dog in a book, A parent may reinforce this by saying, yes, that's a doggy, with a big smile on their face, maybe clapping. Um, Behavioralism is used a lot in like public schools for like discipline and things like that. So complex behaviors are learned as a series of steps in a chain in which each step stimulates each successive step. So universal grammar is from Noam Chomsky. And this theory is that there's a system of grammatical rules and constraints consistent in all world languages. Children are born with a basic set of grammatical rules and categories, and the input they receive sets the parameters to match those of their native language. This means that children have implicit knowledge of language already. Chomsky also proposed that language acquisition depends on an innate species-specific module dedicated to language and not to other forms of learning, which he termed as the language acquisition device. The modularity theory or approach emphasizes the organization of the cognitive infrastructure of the brain as comprising as a series of highly specific modules, including modules for aspects of language processing. So they theorize that language is an innate capacity localized to very domain-specific processors that are encapsulated in their functions from other processors, meaning certain areas of the brain are responsible for certain parts of language processing. So this means that modules composing of the language system each operate using dedicated neural systems in the brain, and they operate independently of one another. And there's 3 bootstrapping theories. The syntactic bootstrapping describes the process by which children use the syntactic frames surrounding unknown verbs to successfully constrain or limit the possible meanings of the verbs. So what do the words around the unfamiliar word mean? So if the sentence is, I am holding a spoon, and they don't know what holding is, but they know what spoon is and they know what I means, it can help them to figure out what holding means. Children also look at the extra linguistic cues surrounding the unknown verb, such as what are the people doing around them? So if mom says, I'm holding a spoon and her hand is out and the spoon is resting on her hand, that also helps them figure out what that verb means. Semantic bootstrapping, children deduce grammatical structures by using word meanings they acquire from observing events around them. And then after they learn words, they use their observation to determine the syntactic category that each word belongs to. So is this new word holding? Is it a noun or is it a verb or is it an adjective? Prosodic bootstrapping suggests that infants use their sensitivity to the acoustic properties of speech, such as pitch or stress, to make inferences about units of language. Once they become aware of these acoustic patterns, they can isolate important language units. So if we say certain words with an emphasis in that sentence, they can then deduce that maybe whatever we emphasized is what holds the most important meaning in that sentence. Social interactionist theory by Vygotsky. Social interaction is important for language development. That's what this theory says. Concepts are first introduced in the context of a social interaction, and then with time, these concepts are internalized. One critical concept of this theory is the zone of proximal development, which is the difference between a child's actual development level and their level of potential development. This focuses on abilities that are in the process of maturing rather than solely on abilities that have already matured. So the textbook gives a good example that a child is asked for a word that rhymes with cat and they can't come up with one. But when they're given 3 choices, they can correctly identify which of those 3 rhymes with cat. So that would be the zone of proximal development. This is theorized to be important because by knowing what children can do with assistance, it's helpful in identifying maturing capabilities and it gives insight into how development works. Piaget has the cognitive theory, which he hypothesized the stages of learning and development that you probably all have heard of when you took your psychology courses, such as the sensory motor, the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and the formal operational stages. He emphasized that achievements in one stage must happen before they can move to the next stage. Piaget did not view language as a domain specific, but as a general ability that closely follows a child's cognitive development. So it's not its own thing, essentially, is what his theory is. He noted that certain cognitive achievements must be in place in order for language achievements to emerge. He also theorized that children are egocentric and predisposed to view the world from only their perspective, and that they cannot have true dialogue until they develop the ability to see others' perspectives. The intentionality model theorizes that children's ability in language, emotional expression, cognition, social interaction, and play develop in tandem, so all at the same time. The child is responsible for driving language forward. It believes that children learn language when what they have in their mind differs from what others around them have in their minds. And so they must express themselves to share this information because they realize the other person isn't thinking what they're thinking. So if they want a glass of milk, they have to tell mom, I want a glass of milk, because they realize what is in their mind differs from what's in mom's mind. So essentially, in order to acquire language, they must be intentional and engage in social interactions. The competition model theorizes that children acquire language forms that they hear frequently and reliably early in life, and then later in life, they acquire forms that they hear rarely or inconsistently. So the concept of overgeneralization highlights the competition model, in that with reliable ongoing exposures to a word or word form, the correct representation of the word is strengthened. The textbook gives the example of when children first apply regular past tense to an irregular past tense word. So go becomes goed because they're applying that rule. But then once they're exposed to the correct past tense, which is went, the incorrect form, that goed, dies out. And this is usually when you hear parents are sad that their little kids stop saying something, because they start to realize the correct way of saying things. And a lot of times parents get sad. The connectionist theories, the connectionist model of language development attempts to visualize the approximate inner workings of the brain. They use models to represent nonlinear, dynamic, and complex development in language and other areas. They model how language is organized across the brain and describe how connections are forged among words within the lexicon. So essentially, the nodes receive input through connections, and then those connections between the nodes strengthen as they continue to receive input. Some nodes and connections can weaken from reduced input or counter evidence. This is similar to how neural networks are formed. So maybe a child has a Dalmatian growing up. When they're learning about what a dog is, they are going to use their dog. And so maybe the connections that dogs have 4 legs and 2 ears and a tail, those start to strengthen. But the connection that dogs have spots weakens as they learn that other dogs don't have spots. They look different than just their childhood pet. The last theory contends that children learn language because they have a reason to talk. So this is the usage-based theory. This theory is based upon evidence on intentionality that emerges during the first year of life. A critical part is intention reading, in which a child's ability to recognize the intentions and mental state of other people. As they use their awareness of social conventions to engage with other people, their general language abilities begin to emerge. So how do theories influence practice? People let their ideas about particular phenomena guide their practices. Practitioners must make an effort to understand the theories that guide their particular practices. Determining whether a theory offers ample support to guide the practices is also important. These practices involve prevention, intervention, remediation, and enrichment practices. Evidence-based practice involves integrating theoretical knowledge with scientific inquiry to inform decision-making. So for SLPs, this includes making decisions about the best interventions and practices that they will implement in order to improve language.